We're going to be in Exodus 20 today, continuing this wide-angle look at what the scriptures teach so we can get the big picture of what the Bible is telling us. So if a team of 50 scholars set out to list the 5 most important texts in the Bible, today's text would be on everyone's list. If you shorten that list down to just 3 texts, this one would still be on many of those lists. The momentous events that happened in the Sinai Peninsula, just east of the tip of the Red Sea, are among the most critical things that happen in the scriptures. So the refugees had escaped Egypt, and they had begun this circuitous journey on their way to the land that God had promised Abraham. In today's text, the community, this myriads of people, arrive in the Sinai and camp under the shadow of the mountain known as Horeb. They had been, by this time, traveling for 3 months. 3 months ago, they had left Egypt. We looked at that just last week. They had made camp and broke camp many times, but now it was different. There was an air of expectancy, tension that they had not known before. Some of them, and I expect almost all of them, had already heard about Mount Horeb. That's where Moses, when he was in exile working as a shepherd, had an extraordinary experience, an encounter with God. It was here that God commissioned him and promised him that those oppressed, exploited Hebrews in Egypt would one day come to this mountain and serve God here. They'd be freed. And here they were, making camp at the base of Mount Horeb. Anticipation among them grew after Moses had gone up the mountain and then returned and called a meeting of the people's leaders. He then addressed the people directly, warning them not to go onto that mountain. If they did, they would be killed. He then did something really strange. He consecrated the entire community. It's as if they were priests. And he told them to wash their clothes and to abstain from sexual relations for 3 days. By this point, anticipation had turned to anxiety. The people didn't know what was going to happen, but whatever it was, they knew that it was serious. Let me skip my notes to a different set here. On the 3rd day, they awoke to thunder and lightning. Lightning repeatedly lighting up the sky. They came out of their tents to see a thick cloud of smoke over the mountains, and everyone in the camp trembled. Now this is verse 17. Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Can you feel what they felt? They come out of their tents. The sky just repeatedly lights with lightning. Thunder rings over and over and over again. That they are about to meet the sender of hail and of locusts and of death, the God whose power brought Egypt to its knees. And what was going to happen to them when they met him? This is verse 18. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. Moses said he was overcome with fear. You and I have never been to a worship service like this. If you go back 3 millennia and experience this, it will remain in the consciousness of a people 3 millennia later. That's what happened with the people of Israel. The readers of this story, so if you were one of the first readers of this story, you would see something that our lack of familiarity with Near Eastern customs causes us to miss. You would recognize that chapters 19 through chapter 28 are a covenant treaty between a vassal state and the king who had conquered them. The form that we have here comes from the kingdom of the Hittites and was called a suzerainty treaty. Those kind of treaties were signed by conquered peoples. But God did not conquer Israel. He freed them. And God did not force them to sign a treaty. He invited them to become his people. So a typical suzerainty treaty would begin with a preamble containing some statement of the conquering king's identity. So this is chapter 20 now, verse 2. I am the Lord your God. And notice, Lord is all in caps. Again, whenever you see Lord in caps, you're not looking at a title. You are looking at a proper name. This is God's name. Scholars believe that it's pronounced Yahweh. I am Yahweh, your God. Following the preamble, the basis for the king's authority over this subordinate nation would be stated. So this is still verse 2. I am Yahweh, your God, and here's the basis of his authority, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. There's something similar to this back in the previous chapter. So in chapter 19, God tells Moses, he gives him the exact words he wants him to say to the leaders of Israel. So this is verse 3. This is what you're to say to the house of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So in a suzerainty treaty, the next section would contain the principal terms that would govern the relationship between the king and this vassal state. We have those principal terms here. We know them as the 10 Commandments. They are at the heart of the covenant between God and Israel. So the next section of a suzerainty treaty spelled out the details of the covenant. So following the 10 Commandments, chapter after chapter, we have the details of the covenant spelled out. The Israelis called this the Book of the Covenant. These are the requirements for Yahweh's covenant people. Next came a section that identified the witnesses to the treaty. So in ancient times, when a covenant like this was established, a sacrifice would be offered, the sacrifice of the covenant, and witnesses from both parties would eat that sacrifice, a ritual meal, together. That's what's happening in chapter 24 of Exodus. Israel's leaders are called up the mountain. They go up with Moses and act as covenant witnesses. So this is verse 10, chapter 24. They saw the God of Israel. That's an extraordinary statement in the Bible. They saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire. But by the way, if you ever read one of these theophanies, an appearance of God to people, you'll see this kind of language. It looked like this. It was like that. It was sort of like this. People can't actually say what they saw. They can only compare it to other things that we know. They saw something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God, and what comes next seems really bizarre to us. And they ate and drank. They saw God and they ate and drank. It sounds like they went to a dinner theater. But what's happening here is they are eating a covenant meal. They are acting as in their role as covenant witnesses. Now, the final section of the suzerainty treaty specified blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. This is what's going to happen to you if you obey. This is what's going to happen if you break the terms of the covenant. That's what we have in Deuteronomy 28, where the blessings and cursings attached to the covenant are spelled out. By agreeing to this covenant, so the people had the chance to say whether they were going to agree to the covenant or not. By agreeing, Israel was saying, we will be Yahweh's people. We will submit to his authority. For them, that meant protection and purpose. For God, it meant another step in his plan to undo the fall and remove the curse and bless all peoples of the earth. Remember Exodus 12, or Genesis 12, God's going to bless all the peoples of the earth through Abraham and his family. Now, that sounds like a win-win situation to me, but it might seem unfair to you that God would limit covenant partnership to just one group of people. How is that fair? What about the Hittites? What about the Egyptians? What about the Assyrians or the Chinese or the Polynesians or Native Americans? But we need to think wide angle about this, about God's choice of one people as opposed to others. His choice was not to the detriment of these other nations, but to their benefit. Israel was chosen for a purpose. They would be molded into the channel through which that blessing promised to Abraham would come to all the nations of the earth. Christopher Wright explains it this way. He says, it's as if a group of people are trapped, cave explorers are trapped underground, and they choose one member of their number to squeeze through the narrow, flooded passage to get out and call for help. The point of the choice is not so that she alone gets saved, but that she will be able to bring help and equipment to ensure the rest get rescued. Was it unfair to the rest that only one was chosen? Well, that would be a strange thing to say. Unfair. It was their only hope. And it's that way with God's choice of Israel. He did not choose Israel instead of other nations. He chose Israel for the sake of other nations. And for that matter, he did not choose you instead of someone else. He chose you for the sake of someone else. In fact, probably for the sake of many others. He chose Israel so that he could use them to convey his blessing to all the peoples of the earth. Israel was to be, these are N.T. Wright's words, a display people, a showcase for the world to show how being in covenant with Yahweh changes people. See, Israel wasn't supposed to keep God's blessing all to herself. She was to be a light for the Gentiles, to bring God's salvation to the ends of the earth. Now, this is chapter 19, verses 5 and 6. God tells them, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations, you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It's really important to understand what God's saying here. What priests did in Israel for the people, represent people to God and then God to people, Israel was to do for all the other nations. The people of Israel were not chosen so that they could enjoy a pleasant little spiritual life for themselves, but so that they could be a blessing to others. Now, what does that have to do with us? Just this. We are chosen for the same reason. God did not choose you simply so that you could be saved and go to heaven. He chose you so that you could be changed and bless the earth. Have you ever noticed, if you look at statements about God's foreordination of people, his sovereign choice of individuals, these are the kinds of things you read. He chose us in him before the creation of the world. Why? Why did he do that? To be saved and go to heaven? No, to be holy and blameless in his sight. Or this, those God foreknew, he also predestined. Why did he do that? Did he predestine us to play harps all day in the great beyond? No, so that we might be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Or this, he chose to give us birth through the word of truth. Why did he do that? That we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created. In the big picture, God chooses people and nations and even local churches so they can carry out his resolute intention to bless all the nations of the earth, all peoples on earth. That's Genesis 12:3. It's always been his purpose. To be chosen by God is a great honor. But we have to realize it's also a great responsibility. Now, while we're thinking big picture, it's imperative that we note that the Lord did not give Israel these treaty stipulations before he saved them from slavery. He did it after. When God called, so if you go back to the beginning of Exodus, when God called the elders of Israel together while they were in Egypt, he did not say, all right, I'm going to show you my instructions. I've summarized them in 10 commandments. If you promise to keep them, I'll rescue you out of Egyptian slavery. No, he rescued them first, and then he gave them instructions on how to live. After they had made the choice, we want to be your people. It's important that we get the order right. Otherwise, we might think that God will only accept us once we get everything in our life straightened out. That's not the way God works. It's not the way we work. Imagine that after the church service, you go out to eat. And when it's time to leave, your server, you haven't seen your server for the last 20 minutes, and your server's not brought you a check. And so you go to the register, you tell the person, hey, I ordered this, I haven't got my check. And you pull your credit card out, and he says, it's the manager, and he says, don't worry about it, your bill's already been taken care of. And you say, but I didn't pay. And he says, yeah, I know, someone else has paid your bill for you. Well, I at least want to leave a tip. That's been taken care of too, very generously. But I always pay my way. Can I go in the back and wash dishes? That's not going to change anything. Your bill's already been paid. See, too many Christians are trying to wash the dishes. They feel like they need to pay their own way, but that's not what God wants. While they're busy trying to pay their own way, they're missing the real work that God has for them. See, in the big picture, God is always the one who takes the initiative. It's not us. He pays the bill. He doesn't want us to earn our way any more than he wanted the Hebrews to earn their way out of Egypt. The biblical term for that is grace. Someone might say, yeah, well, maybe we don't have to pay up front, but there's no such thing as a free ride. Grace comes with strings attached. There are all these rules that we're supposed to keep, and we have to keep for the rest of our lives. Well, you know what? If you want to think of it that way, go ahead. But consider this. We were broken in the fall. And we need strings attached to help us stand and walk and reach and touch. You can think of the laws given at Sinai as the strings attached if you want to. But those strings were never meant to inhibit us, just the opposite. They were meant to direct us, lift us, even help us to dance. If we try to stand without them, we keep falling back into self-centeredness and pointlessness. God's instructions keep us from that. See, the law was a wonderful gift. people talk about it as though it was some terribly inhibiting thing. It was this wonderful gift, but it was also a temporary gift. Paul wrote, the law was put in charge to lead us to Christ that we might be justified by faith. Now that faith has come, we're no longer under the supervision of law. See, God's intention was that one day, all of us marionettes with our strings would be able to stand and walk and dance for ourselves. We no longer need the strings. He was turning us into real people. That was the plan all along. When we can follow the internal leading of the Spirit, the external strings of the law aren't necessary. I said the law is temporary, but just because something's temporary does not mean it's not important. Your time in the womb was temporary, but it was vital. The law was temporary, but it played a vital role in God's long-range plan. Now, think about the second commandment. Do you know what the second commandment is? The second commandment is, you shall not make for yourself any graven image. In Moses' time, people the world over who were religious had idols, graven images of their gods. The Egyptians had idols. The Hittites had idols. The Canaanites had idols. If a person didn't have idols, you could assume that that person was irreligious. What kind of God would not have a graven image? The answer is the kind who has ungraven images, human images. The instructions at Sinai were meant to help people live in a way as to represent, to image God to everyone else. That had always been the plan. So remember, in the beginning, this is Genesis chapter 1, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. An idol, so if you worship an idol, the idea is you're not actually worshiping the idol. Did you realize people bow down to the idol? They're worshiping the God that inhabits the idol. The idol is a 3D representation of that God, making it approachable for people. God made living images of himself that would render him approachable to people. The fall messed up that image. The law was given to refine the image, make it usable again in people. There's another reason the law was important. It showed the way to obtain God's blessing. See, this is something that we often don't think about. There is a kind of life that calls forth God's blessing, and there's kind of life that does not. And it's profitable to ask which kind we're leading. The 10 Commandments, or in Hebrew, it's not 10 commandments. It's 10 words. The 10 words are a picture of the kind of life that receives God's blessing. See, the law was a great gift of God. The strings that help the marionettes stand and finally dance. It's a great gift, but it's a limited gift. There are things it could never do. It could not make anything perfect. That's what the author of Hebrews says. It could not make us right, bring us into a right relationship with God. No one will be declared righteous by observing the law. The law could not provide a clear conscience. That's Hebrews again, chapter 9, verse 9. Neither could it provide humans with the kind of life that survives death. St. Paul wrote bluntly, if a law had been given that could impart life, obviously there never has been such a law, then righteousness would have come by the law. All right. Let's back up one more time, take a wide-angle view of what's going on in the giving of the law. It's easy to think of the law as this bunch of regulations that God wants us to keep, and if we don't keep them, he gets mad at us. That idea misses something really important. The law given at Sinai was all about relationships. It's all about relationships. The first 4 commands, the first 4 words, describe what a healthy relationship to God looks like. So, for example, you shall have no other gods before me. Tells me that God comes first. I'm not going to have a satisfying relationship with him if I let other gods, money, for example, or career, take his place. Just like I'm not going to have a satisfying relationship with my wife if I let other women take her place. It's about relationship. The final 6 commands, often called the second table or the second tablet of commands. Probably all the commands were just on one tablet. The reason there were 2 tablets, one was for God, the other was for Israel. These are the terms of the covenant. But those last 6 commands show us how to be in right relationship with people. It's about relationships. Dishonoring parents, lying about others, committing adultery, stealing, caring more for things than for people. These behaviors destroy relationships. The law is about relationships for the simple reason that life is about relationships. If you haven't yet discovered that, you're not as happy as God intends you to be. Life is about relationships. And life is about relationships because God is about relationships. At the very heart of God exists an eternal, joyous relationship between Father, Son, and Spirit. And here's the remarkable thing. God has invited us into that relationship. The Holy Trinity is not a clique. It's not that we become gods. It's we become, at last, humans in a relationship with God and with each other that lasts forever. That's what this is about. That's what God is doing. And we get to be his covenant partners in it. All right, let's pray.